Like that day in July, almost 9 years back, when the beautiful men were cold. In typical summer weather, sticky and bright, Alice Manfred stood for 3 hours on Fifth Avenue, marveling at the cold, black faces and listening to drums saying what the graceful women and the marching men could not. What was possible to say was already in print on a banner that repeated a couple of promises from the Declaration of Independence and waved over the head of its bearer. But what was meant came from the drums. It was July in 1917, and the beautiful faces were cold and quiet, moving slowly into the space the drums were building for them. During the march, it seemed to Alice as though the day passed, the night too, and still she stood there, the hand of the little girl in her own, staring into each cold face that passed. The drums and the freezing faces hurt her, but hurt was better than fear. Alice had been frightened for a long time. First, she was frightened of Illinois, then Springfield, Massachusetts, then 11th Avenue, 3rd Avenue, Park Avenue. Recently, she had begun to feel safe nowhere south of 110th Street, and Fifth Avenue was for her the most fearful of all. That was where white men leaned out of motor cars with folded dollar bills peeping from their palms. It was where salesmen touched her and only her, as though she were part of the goods that they condescended to sell her. It was the tissue required if the management was generous enough to let you try on a blouse, but no hat, in a store. It was where she, a woman of 50 and independent means, had no surname. Where women who spoke English said, "Don't sit there, honey, you never know what they have." And women who knew no English at all and would never own a pair of silk stockings moved away from her if she sat next to them on the trolley. Now, down Fifth Avenue from curb to curb came a tide of cold black faces, speechless and unblinking because of what they meant to say, but did not trust themselves to say, the drum said for them, and what they had seen with their own eyes and through the eyes of others, the drums described to a T. The hurt her, but the fear was gone at last. Fifth Avenue was put into focus now, and so was her protection of the newly orphaned girl in her charge. From then on, she hid the girl's hair in braids tucked under, lest white men see it raining down her shoulders and push dollar-wrapped fingers toward her. She instructed her about deafness and blindness and how valuable and necessary they were, in the company of white women who spoke English and those who did not, as well as in the presence of their children. Taught her how to crawl along the walls of buildings, disappear into doorways, cut across corners and choked traffic, how to do anything, move anywhere to avoid a white boy over the age of 11. Much of this she could effect with her dress, but as the girl grew older, more elaborate specifications had to be put in place. High-heeled shoes with the graceful straps across the arch, the vampy hats closed on the head with saucy brims framing the face, makeup of any kind, all of that was outlawed in Alice Manfred's house, especially the coats slung low in the back and not buttoned, but clutched like a bathrobe or a towel around the body, forcing the women who wore them to look like they had just stepped out of the bathtub and were already ready for bed. Privately, Alice admired them, the coats and the women who wore them. She sewed linings into these coats when she felt like working, and she had to look twice over her shoulder when the gay Northeasters and the City Belles strolled down 7th Avenue. They were so handsome. But this envy-streaked pleasure Alice closeted and never let the girl see how she admired those ready-for-bed-in-the-street clothes. And she told the Miller sisters, who kept small children during the day for mothers who worked out of the house, what her feelings were. They did not need persuading, having been looking forward to the day of judgment for a dozen years and expecting its sweet relief any minute now. They had lists of every restaurant, diner, and club that sold liquor and were not above reporting owners and customers to the police until they discovered that such news in the racket squad was not only annoying, it was redundant. When Alice Manfred collected the little girl from the Miller sisters, on those evenings following the days her fine stitching was solicited, the three women sat down in the kitchen to hum and sigh over cups of postum at the signs of imminent demise. Such as not just ankles, but knees in full view, lip rouge red as hellfire, burnt matchsticks rubbed on eyebrows, fingernails tipped with blood. You couldn't tell the street walkers from the mothers. And the men. You know, the things they thought nothing of saying out loud to any woman who passed by could not be repeated before children. They did not know for sure, but they suspected that the dances were beyond nasty because the music was getting worse and worse with each passing season the Lord waited to make himself known. Songs that used to start in the head and fill the heart had dropped on down to the places below the sash and the buckled belts. Lower and lower until the music was so low down you had to shut your windows and just suffer the summer heat when the men in the shirt sleeves propped themselves in window frames or clustered on rooftops, in alleyways, on stoops, and in the apartments of relatives, playing the low-down stuff that signaled imminent demise. Or when a woman with a baby on her shoulder and a skillet in her hand sang, "Turn to my pillow where my sweet man used to be. How long, how long, how long?" Because you could hear it everywhere, even if you lived, as Alice Manfred and the Miller sisters did, on Clifton Place, with a leafy 6-foot tree every 100 feet, a quiet street with no fewer than 5 motor cars parked at the curb. You could still hear it, and there's no mistaking what it did to the children under their care, cocking their heads and swaying ridiculous, unformed hips. Alice thought the low-down music, and in Illinois it was worse than here, had something to do with the silent black women and men marching down Fifth Avenue to advertise their anger over 200 dead in East St. Louis, 2 of whom were her sister and brother-in-law killed in the riots. So many whites killed, the papers would not print the number. Some said the rioters were disgruntled veterans who had fought in all-colored units, were refused the services of the YMCA over there and over here, and came home to white violence more intense than when they enlisted. And unlike the battles they fought in Europe, stateside fighting was pitiless and totally without honor. Others said they were whites terrified by the wave of Southern Negroes flooding the towns, searching for work and places to live. A few thought about it and said how perfect was the control of workers, none of whom, like crabs in a barrel requiring no lid, no stick, not even a monitoring observation, would get out of the barrel. Alice, however, believed she knew the truth better than everybody. Her brother-in-law was not a veteran and had been living in East St. Louis since before the war. Nor did he need a white man's job. He owned a pool hall. As a matter of fact, he wasn't even in the riot. He had no weapons, confronted nobody on the street. He was pulled off a streetcar and stomped to death. And Alice's sister had just got the news and had gone back home to try and forget the color of his entrails when her house was torched and she burned crispy in its flame. Her only child, a little girl named Dorcas, sleeping across the road with her very best girlfriend, did not hear the fire engine clanging and roaring down the street because when it was called, it didn't come. But she must have seen the flames, must have, because the whole street was screaming. She never said anything about it. She went to 2 funerals in 5 days and never said a word. Alice thought, no, it wasn't the war and the disgruntled veterans. It wasn't the droves and droves of colored people flocking to paychecks in streets full of themselves. It was the music. The dirty, get-on-down music the women sang and the men played and both danced to, close and shameless or apart and wild. Alice was convinced, and so were the Miller sisters as they blew into cups of postum in the kitchen. It made you do unwise, disorderly things. Just hearing it was like violating the law. There had been none of that at the Fifth Avenue March, just the drums and the colored Boy Scouts passing out explanatory leaflets to white men in straw hats who needed to know what the freezing faces already knew. Alice had picked up a leaflet that had floated to the pavement, read the words, and shifted her weight at the curb. She read the words and looked at Dorcas and read the words again. What she read seemed crazy, out of focus. Some great gap lunged between the print and the child. She glanced between them, struggling for the connection, something to close the distance between the silent, staring child and the slippery, crazy words. Then suddenly, like a rope cast for rescue, the drum spanned the distance, gathered them all up and connected them. Alice, Dorcas, her sister, and her brother-in-law, the Boy Scouts and the frozen black faces, the watchers on the pavement and those in the windows above. Alice carried that gathering rope with her always after that day on Fifth Avenue and found it reliably secure and tight most of the time, except when the men sat on windowsills fingering horns and the women wondered how long. The rope broke then, disturbing her peace, making her aware of flesh and something so free she could smell its blood smell, made her aware of its life below the sash and its red lip rouge. She knew from sermons and editorials that it wasn't real music, just colored folk stuff. Harmful, certainly, embarrassing, of course, but not real, not serious. Yet Alice Manfred swore she heard a complicated anger in it, something hostile that disguised itself as a flourish and roaring seduction. But the part she hated most was its appetite, its longing for the bash, the slit, a kind of careless hunger for a fight, or a red ruby stick pin for a tie. Either would do. It faked happiness, faked welcome, but it did not make her feel generous, this juke joint, barrel hooch, tonk house music. It made her hold her hand in the pocket of her apron to keep from smashing it through the glass pane, to snatch the world in her fist and squeeze the life out of it for doing what it did and did and did to her and everybody else she knew or knew about. Better to close the windows and the shutters, sweat in the summer heat of a silent Clifton Place apartment than to risk a broken window or a yelping that might not know where or how to stop. I have seen her passing a cafe or an uncurtained window when some phrase or other, hit me but don't quit me, drifted out, and watched her reach with one hand for the safe gathering rope thrown to her 8 years ago on Fifth Avenue and balled the other one into a fist in her coat pocket. I don't know how she did it, balance herself with 2 different hand gestures, but she was not alone in trying, and she was not alone in losing. It was impossible to keep the Fifth Avenue drums separate from the belt-buckle tunes vibrating from pianos and spinning on every Victrola. Impossible. Some nights are silent, not a motor car turning within earshot. No drunks or restless babies crying for their mothers, and Alice opens any window she wants to and hears nothing at all. Wondering at this totally silent night, she can go back to bed, but as soon as she turns the pillow to its smoother, cooler side, a melody line she doesn't remember where from sings itself, loud and unsolicited, in her head. When I was young and in my prime, I could get my barbecue any old time. They are greedy, reckless words, loose and infuriating, but hard to dismiss because underneath, holding up the looseness like a palm, are the drums that put Fifth Avenue into focus. Her niece, of course, didn't have the problem. Alice had been re-raising her, correcting her since the summer of 1917. And although her earliest memory when she arrived from East St. Louis was a parade her aunt took her to, a kind of funeral parade for her mother and her father, Dorcas remembered it differently. While her aunt worried about how to keep the heart ignorant of the hips and the head in charge of both, Dorcas lay on a chenille bedspread, tickled and happy, knowing that there was no place to be where, somewhere close by, somebody was not licking his licorice stick, tickling the ivories, beating his skins, blowing off his horns, while a knowing woman sang, "Ain't nobody going to keep me down. You got the right key, baby, but the wrong keyhole. You got to get it, bring it, and put it right here or else." Resisting her aunt's protection and restraining hands, Dorcas thought of that life below the sash as all the life there was. The drums she heard at the parade were only the first part, the first word of a command. For her, the drums were not an all-embracing rope of fellowship, discipline, and transcendence. She remembered them as a beginning, a start of something she looked to complete. Back in East St. Louis, as the little porch fell, wood chips, ignited and smoking, exploding in the air. One of them must have entered her stretched, dumb mouth and traveled down her throat, because it smoked and glowed there still. Dorcas never let it out and never put it out. At first she thought if she spoke of it, it would leave her, or she would lose it through her mouth. And when her aunt took her on a train to the city and crushed her hand while they watched a long parade, the bright wood chip sank further and further down until it lodged comfortably somewhere below her navel. She watched the black, unblinking men, and the drums assured her that the glow would never leave her, that it would be waiting for her and with her whenever she wanted to be touched by it, and whenever she wanted to let it loose to leap into fire again. Whatever happened would be quick, like the dolls. They would have gone fast. Wood, after all, in a wooden cigar box. The red tissue paper skirt on Rochelle immediately. Like a match. And then Bernadine's blue silk and Faye's white cotton cape. The fire would eat away at their legs, blacken them first with its hot breath, and round their eyes with the tiny lashes and eyebrows she had painted in so very carefully, would have watched themselves disappear. Dorcas avoided thinking about the huge coffin just there in front, a few feet to her left, and about the medicinal odor of Aunt Alice sitting next to her, by concentrating on Rochelle and Bernadine and Faye, who would have no funeral at all. It made her bold. Even as a 9-year-old in elementary school, she was bold. However tight and tucked in her braids, however clunky her high-top shoes that covered ankles other girls exposed in low-cut Oxfords. However black and thick her stockings, nothing hid the boldness swaying under her cast-iron skirt. Eyeglasses could not obscure it, nor could the pimples on her skin brought on by hard brown soap and a tilted diet. When she was little and Alice Manfred agreed to sew for a month or two, Dorcas was watched over after school by the Miller sisters. Often there were 4 other children, sometimes 1 other. Their play was quiet and confined to a small area of the dining room. The 2-armed sister, Frances Miller, gave them apple butter sandwiches to eat. The 1-armed one, Neola, read them psalms. The strict discipline was occasionally lightened when Frances napped at the kitchen table. Then Neola might grow tired of the constraint the verses imposed on her own voice and select a child to light a match for her cigarette. She would take fewer than 3 puffs, and something in the gesture stirred something inside her, and she told her charges cautionary tales. Her stories, however, of the goodness of good behavior collapsed before the thrill of the sin they deplored. The truth is that the message in her instructions failed because a week after he put the engagement ring on Neola's finger, the soon-to-be groom at her wedding left the state. The pain of his refusal was visual, for over her heart, curled like a shell, was a hand on which he had positioned the ring, as though she held the broken pieces of her heart together in the crook of a frozen arm. No other part of her body was touched by this paralysis. Her right hand, the one that turned the tissue-thin pages of the Old Testament, held an old gold cigarette to her lips, was straight and steady. But the stories she told them of moral decay, of the wicked who preyed on the good, were made more poignant by this clutch of arm to breast. She told them how she had personally advised a friend to respect herself and leave the man who was no good to or for her. Finally, the friend agreed, but in 2 days, she went right back to him, God help us all, and Neola never spoke to her again. She told them how a very young girl, no more than 14, had left family and friends to traipse 400 miles after a boy who joined the army, only to be left behind and to turn to a completely dissolute life in a camp town. So they could see, couldn't they, the power of sin in the company of a weak mind? The children scratched their knees and nodded, but Dorcas, at least, was enchanted by the frail, melty tendency of the flesh and the paradise that could make a woman go right back after 2 days, or make a girl travel 400 miles to a camp town, or fold Neola's arm, the better to hold the pieces of her heart in her hand. Paradise, all for paradise. By the time she was 17, her whole life was unbearable. And when I think about it, I know just how she felt. It is terrible when there is absolutely nothing to do or worth doing except to lie down and hope when you are naked she won't laugh at you, or that he, holding your breasts, won't wish they were some other way. Terrible, but worth the risk, because there's no other thing to do. Although, being 17, you do it. Study, work, memorize, bite into food and the reputations of your friends. Laugh at the things that are right side up and those that are upside down. It doesn't matter because you are not doing the thing worth doing, which is lying down somewhere in a dimly lit place, enclosed in arms and supported by the core of the world. Think how it is, if you can manage. Just manage it. Nature freaks for you then, turns itself into shelter byways. Pillows for two. Spread the limbs of lilac bushes low enough to hide you. And the city, in its own great way, gets down for you. Cooperates, smoothing its sidewalks, correcting its curbstones, offering you melons and green apples on the corner. Racks of yellowhead scarves, strings of Egyptian beads, Kansas fried chicken, and something with raisins call attention to an open window where the aroma seems to lurk. And if that's not enough, doors to speakeasies stand ajar, and in that cool, dark place a clarinet coughs and clears its throat, waiting for the woman to decide on the key. She makes up her mind, and as you pass by, informs your back that she is Daddy's little angel child. The city is smart at this, smelling in good and looking raunchy, sending secret messages disguised as public signs. This way, open here, danger to let colored only single men, on sale women wanted, private room, stop dog on premises, absolutely no money down, fresh chicken free delivery fast, and good at opening locks, dimming stairways, covering your moans with its own. There was a night in her 16th year when Dorcas stood in her body and offered it to either of the brothers for a dance. Both boys were shorter than she, but both were equally attractive. More to the point, they outstepped everybody so completely that when they needed tough competition, they were forced to dance with themselves. Sneaking out to that party with her best friend Felice ought to have been hard to arrange, but Alice Manfred had overnight business in Springfield, and nothing could have been easier. The only difficulty was in finding something foxy enough to wear. The two girlfriends climbed the stairs, led straight to the right place, more by the stride piano pouring over the door saddle than their recollection of the apartment number. They paused to exchange looks before knocking. Even in the dim hallway, the dark-skinned friend heightens the cream color of the other. Felice's oily hair enhances Dorcas's soft, dry waves. The door opens and they step in. Before the lights are turned out and before the sandwiches and the spiked soda water disappear, the one managing the record player chooses fast music suitable for the brightly lit room, where obstructing furniture has been shoved against the walls, pushed into the hallway and bedrooms piled high with coats. Under the ceiling light, pairs move like twins born with, if not for the other, sharing a partner's pulse like a second jugular. They believe they know before the music does what their hands, their feet are to do, but that illusion is the music's secret drive. The control it tricks them into believing is theirs, the anticipation it anticipates. In between record changes, while the girls fan blouse necks to air-damp collarbones, or pat with anxious hands the damage moisture has done to their hair, the boys press folded handkerchiefs to their foreheads. Laughter covers indiscreet glances of welcome and a promise, and takes the edge off gestures of betrayal and abandon. Dorcas and Felice are not strangers at the party. Nobody is. People neither of them has seen before join the fun as easily as those who have grown up in the building. But both girls have expectations made higher by the trouble they'd had planning outfits for the escapade. Dorcas, at 16, has yet to wear silk hose, and her shoes are those of someone much younger or very old. Felice has helped her loosen 2 braids behind her ears, and her fingertip is stained with the rouge she has stroked across her lips. With her collar turned under, her dress is more adult-looking, but the hard hand of a warning grown-up shows everywhere else, in the hem, in the waist-centered belt, the short, puffy sleeves. She and Felice have tried removing the belt altogether, then fixing it at her navel. Both strategies prove hateful. They know that a badly dressed body is no body at all, and Felice had to chatter compliments all the way down 7th Avenue to get Dorcas to forget about her clothes and focus on the party. Music soars to the ceiling and through the windows wide open for circulation as they enter. Immediately, both girls are snatched by male hands and spun into the dancing center of the room. Dorcas recognizes her partner as Martin, who had been in her elocution class for a hot minute, which was as long as it took for the teacher to realize he would never relinquish acts for ask. Dorcas dances well, not as fast as some others, but she is graceful, in spite of those shaming shoes, and she is provocative. It is after 2 more dances that she notices the brothers commanding the attention of a crowd in the dining room. On the street, in vestibules as well as house parties, they are spectacular, moving like taut silk or loose metal. The stomach jump Dorcas and Felice have agreed is the sign of real interest and possible love surfaces and spreads as Dorcas watches the brothers. The sandwiches are gone now, the potato salad too, and everybody knows that the time for lights out music is approaching. The unbelievable agility, the split-second timing the brothers are putting on display announces the culmination of the fast dancing segment of the party. Dorcas moves into the hall that parallels the living and dining room. From its shadows, through the archway, she has an unrestricted view of the brothers as they bring the performance to its rousing close. Laughing, they accept the praise that is due them. Adoring looks from girls, congratulating punches and slaps from the boys. They have wonderful faces, these brothers. Their smiles, more than flawless teeth, are amused and inviting. Someone fights with the Victrola, places the arm on, scratches the record, tries again, then exchanges the record for another. During the lull, the brothers notice Dorcas. Taller than most, she gazes at them over the head of her dark friend. The brothers' eyes seem wide and welcoming to her. She moves forward out of the shadow and slips through the group. The brothers turn up the wattage of their smiles. The right record is on the turntable now. She can hear its preparatory hiss as the needle slides towards its first groove. Brothers smile brilliantly. One leans a fraction of an inch toward the other and, never losing eye contact with Dorcas, whispers something. The other looks Dorcas up and down as she moves toward them. Then, just as the music, slow and smoky, loads up in the air, his smile bright as ever, he wrinkles his nose and turns away. Dorcas has been acknowledged, appraised, and dismissed in the time it takes for a needle to find its opening groove. The stomach jump of possible love is nothing compared to the ice flows that block up her veins now. The body she inhabits is unworthy. Although it is young and all she has, it is as if it had decayed on the vine at budding time. No wonder Neola closed her arm and held the pieces of her heart in her hand. So by the time Joe Trace whispered to her through the crack of a closing door, her life had become almost unbearable. Almost. The flesh, heavily despised by the brothers, held secret the love appetite soaring inside it. I've seen swollen fish, serenely blind, floating in the sky. Without eyes, but somehow directed, these airships swim below cloud foam, and nobody can be turned away from the sight of them because it's like watching a private dream. That was what her hunger was like. Mesmerizing, directed, floating like a public secret just under the cloud cover. Alice Manfred had worked hard to privatize her niece, but she was no match for a city seeping music that begged and challenged each and every day. Come, it said, come and do wrong. Even the grandmothers sweeping the stairs closed their eyes and held their heads back as they celebrated their sweet desolation. Nobody does me like you do me. In the year that passed between the Dancing Brothers' dismissal and Alice Manfred's club meeting, the yoke Alice had knotted around Dorcas's neck frayed till it split. Other than the club women, very few knew where Joe Trace met her. Not at the candy counter of Dougie's where he first saw her and wondered if that, the peppermint she bought, was what insulted her skin, light and creamy everywhere but her cheeks. Joe met Dorcas in Alice Manfred's house, right up under her nose and right before her very eyes. He had gone there to deliver an order to Malvon Edwards' cousin, Sheila, who said if Joe came to 237 Clifton Place before noon, he could deliver her order, the number 2 nut brown and the vanishing cream, right there, and she wouldn't have to wait till the following Saturday or walk all the way over to Lenox at night to pick it up. Unless, of course, he wanted to come to her on her job. Joe decided he would wait till next Saturday because not collecting the $1.35 wasn't going to strap him. But after he left Miss Ransom's house and stood for half an hour watching Bud and CT abusing each other at checkers, he decided to check Sheila out right fast and quit for the day. His stomach was a bit sour and his feet already hurt. He didn't want to be caught delivering or writing orders in the rain either, rain that had been threatening all during that warm October morning. And even though getting home early meant the extended company of a speechless Violet while he fussed with the sink trap or the pulley that turned the clothesline on their side of the building, the Saturday meal would be early too and satisfying. Late summer greens cooked with the ham bone left over from last Sunday. Joe looked forward to the lean, scrappy end of the week meals, but hated the Sunday one. A baked ham, a sweet, heavy pie to follow it. Violet's determination to grow an ass she swore she once owned was killing him. Once upon a time, he bragged about her cooking. Couldn't wait to get back to the house and devour it. But he was 50 now, and appetites change, we know. He still liked candy, hard candy, not divinity or caramel. Sour balls being his favorite. If Violet would confine herself to soup and boiled vegetables with a bit of bread to go along, he would be perfectly satisfied. That's what he was thinking about when he found 237 and climbed the stairs. The argument between CT and Bud over the fate of SS Ethiopia had been too good, too funny. He had listened to them longer than he thought because it was way past noon when he got there. Woman noise could be heard through the door. Joe rang anyway. The peppermint girl with the bad skin answered the door. And while he was telling her who he was and what he'd come for, Sheila poked her head into the vestibule and shouted, "CPT! Surprise me for once, Joe Trace." He smiled and stepped in the door. Stood there smiling and did not put his sample case down until the hostess, Alice Manfred, came up and told him to come in the parlor. They were thrilled to have him interrupt their social. It was a luncheon meeting of the Civic Doubters to plan for the Thanksgiving fundraiser for the National Negro Business League. They had settled what they could, tabled what they had to, and begun the chicken a la king lunch over which Alice had taken the greatest pains. Pleased, happy even with their work and with each other's company, they did not know they were missing anything until Alice sent Dorcas to answer the ring, and Sheila, remembering what she had said to Joe, jumped up when she heard a male voice. They made him feel like the singing men in spats, the young ones who clustered on the corners wearing ties the color of handkerchiefs sticking out of their breast pockets. Young roosters who stood without waiting for the chicks who were waiting for them. Under the women's flirty, appraising eyes, Joe felt the pleasure of his own smile, as though sand-colored spats covered his shoe tops. They laughed, tapped the tablecloth with their fingertips, and began to tease, berate, and adore him all at once. They told him how tall men like him made them feel, complained about his lateness and insolence, and asked him what else he had in his case besides whatever it was that made Sheila so excited. They wondered why he never rang their doorbells or climbed 4 flights of double flight stairs to deliver anything to them. They sang their compliments, their abuse, and only Alice confined herself to a thin smile, a closed look, and did not join the comments with one of her own. Of course he stayed to lunch, of course, although he tried not to eat anything much and spoil his appetite for the late summer greens he was sure was simmering in the pot for him. But the woman touched his hair and looked right at him and ordered him, "Come on over here, man. Sit yourself down. Fix you a plate? Let me fix you a plate." He protested. They insisted. He opened his case. They offered to buy him out. "Eat, baby, eat." They said, "You not going out in that pneumonia weather without something sticking to your bones. Don't make no sense with all we got here. Dorcas, girl, bring this man an empty plate so I can fill it for him here." "Hush, Sheila." They were women his age mostly, with husbands, children, grandchildren too. Hard workers for themselves and anyone who needed them. And they thought men were ridiculous and delicious and terrible, taking every opportunity to let them know that they were. In a group such as this one, they could do with impunity what they were cautious about alone with any man, stranger or friend, who rang the doorbell with a sample case in hand, no matter how tall he was, how country his smile, or however much sadness was in his eyes. Besides, they liked his voice. It had a pitch, a note they heard only when they visited stubborn old folks who would not budge from their front yards and overworked fields to come to the city. It reminded them of men who wore hats to plow and to eat supper in, who blew into saucers of coffee and held knives in their fists when they ate. So they looked right at him and told him any way they could how ridiculous he was, and how delicious and how terrible, as if he didn't know. Joe Trace counted on flirty, laughing women to buy his wares, and he knew better than to take up with any of them. Not if he wanted to be able to lean over a pool table for a shot, exposing his back to his customers' husbands. But that day in Alice Manfred's house, as he listened to and returned their banter, something in the wordplay took on weight. I've wondered about it, what he thought then and later, and about what he said to her. He whispered something to Dorcas when she let him out the door, and nobody looked more pleased and surprised than he did. If I remember right, That October lunch in Alice Manfred's house, something was off. Alice was vague, and anybody in her company for 30 minutes knew that wasn't her style. She was the one who, with a look, could cut good gossip down to a titter when it got out of hand. And maybe it was her head of a seamstress head that made what you thought was a cheerful dress turn loud and tatty next to hers. But she could lay a table. Food might be a tad skimpy in the portions, and I believe she had a prejudice against butter. She used so little of it in her cakes. But the biscuits were light, and the plates, the flatwares, sparkling and arranged just so. Open her napkins wide as you please, and not a cat face anywhere. She was polite at the lunch, of course. Not too haughty either, but not paying close attention to things. Distracted she was. About Dorcas, probably. I always believed that girl was a pack of lies. I could tell by her walk her underclothes were beyond her years, even if her dress wasn't. Maybe back in October, Alice was beginning to think so too. By the time January came, nobody had to speculate. Everybody knew. I wonder if she had a premonition of Joe Trace knocking on her door, or it could have been something she read in all those newspapers stacked neatly along the baseboard in her room. Everybody needs a pile of newspapers to peel potatoes on, serve bathroom needs, wrap garbage. But not like Alice Manfred. She must have read them over and over, else why would she keep them? And if she read anything in the newspaper twice, she knew too little about too much. If you have secrets you want kept or want to figure out those other people have, a newspaper can turn your mind. The best thing to find out what's going on is to watch how people maneuver themselves in the streets. What sidewalk preachers stop them in their tracks? Do they walk right through the boys kicking cans along the sidewalk or holler at them to quit? Ignore the men sitting on car fenders or stop to exchange a word? If a fight breaks out between a man and a woman, do they cross in the middle of the block to watch or run to the corner in case it gets messy? One thing for sure, the streets will confuse you, teach you, or break your head. But Alice Manfred wasn't the kind to give herself reasons to be in the street. She got through them quick as she could to get back to her house. And if she had come out more often, sat on the stoop, or gossiped in front of the beauty shop, she would have known more than what the paper said. She might have known what was happening under her nose. When she did find out what took place between that October day and the awful January one that ended everything, the last people on earth she wanted to see was Joe Trace or anybody connected to him. It happened, though. The woman who avoided the streets let into her living room, the woman who sat down in the middle of one. Toward the end of March, Alice Manfred put her needles aside to think again of what she called the impunity of the man who killed her niece just because he could. It had not been hard to do. It had not even made him think twice about what danger he was putting himself in. He just did it. One man, one defenseless girl. Death. A sample case man. A nice, neighborly, everybody knows him man. The kind you let in your house because he was not dangerous, because you had seen him with children, bought his products and never heard a scrap of gossip about him doing wrong. Felt not only safe but kindly in his company because he was the sort women ran to when they thought they were being followed or watched or needed someone to have the extra key just in case you lock yourself out. He was the man who took you to your door if you missed the trolley and had to walk night streets at night, who warned young girls away from hooch joints and the men who lingered there. Women teased him because they trusted him. He was one of those men who might have marched down Fifth Avenue, cold and silent and dignified, into the space the drums made. He knew wrong wasn't right and did it anyway. Alice Manfred had seen and borne much, had been scared all over the country, in every street of it. Only now did she feel truly unsafe because the brutalizing men and their brutal women were not just out there, they were in her block, her house. A man had come in her living room and destroyed her niece. His wife had come right in the funeral to nasty and dishonor her. She would have called the police after both of them if everything she knew about Negro life had made it even possible to consider. To actually volunteer to talk to one, black or white, to let him in her house, watch him adjust his hips in her chair, to accommodate the blue steel that made him a man. Idle and withdrawn in her grief and shame, she whittled away the days making lace for nothing, reading her newspapers, tossing them on the floor, picking them up again. She read them differently now. Every week since Dorcas's death, during the whole of January and February, a paper laid bare the bones of some broken woman. Man kills wife. 8 accused of rape dismissed. Woman and girl victims of. Woman commits suicide. White attackers indicted. 5 women caught. Woman says man beat. In jealous rage, man. Defenseless as ducks, she thought. Or were they? Read carefully, the news accounts revealed that most of these women, subdued and broken, had not been defenseless, or, like Dorcas, easy prey. All over the country, black women were armed. That, thought Alice, that, at least, they had learned. Didn't everything on God's earth have or require defense? Speed, some poison in the leaf, the tongue, the tail, a mask, flight, numbers in the millions producing numbers in the millions. A thorn here, a spike there. Natural prey, easy pickings? I don't think so. Aloud she said it. I don't think so. Worn spots in the linen had been strengthened with 60-weight thread. Laundered and folded, it lay in a basket her mother had used. Alice raised the ironing board and spread newspaper under it to keep the hems clean. She was waiting not only for the irons to heat, but also for a brutal woman black as soot, known to carry a knife. She waited with less hesitation than she had before, with none of the scary, angry feelings she had in January, when a woman saying she was Violet Trace had tried to see her, talk or something, knocked on her door so early in the morning, Alice thought it was the law. I don't have a thing to say to you, not one thing. She had said it in a loud whisper through the chained opening in the door and slammed it shut. She didn't need the name to be afraid or to know who she was, the star of her niece's funeral. The woman who ruined the service, changed the whole point and meaning of it, and was practically all anybody talked about when they talked about Dorcas's death, and in the process had changed the woman's name. Violent, they called her now. No wonder. Alice, sitting in the first seat in the first aisle, had watched the church commotion stunned. Later, and little by little, feelings, like seed trash expelled on a beach, strange and recognizable, stark and murky, returned. Chief among them was fear and a new thing, anger. At Joe Trace, who had been the one who did it, seduced her niece right under her nose in her very own house. The nice one, the man who sold ladies' product on the side, a familiar figure in just about every building in town. A man store owners and landlords liked because he set the children's toys in a neat row when they left them scattered on the sidewalk. Who the children liked because he never minded them, and liked among men because he never cheated in a game, egged a stupid fight on, or carried tales, and he left their women alone. Liked among the women because he made them feel like girls, liked by girls because he made them feel like women, which she thought was what Dorcas was looking for. Murderer. But Alice wasn't afraid of him, nor now his wife. For Joe, she felt trembling fury at his snake in the grass stealing of the girl in her charge, and shame that the grass he had snaked through was her own. The watched and guarded environment where unmarried and unmarriageable pregnancy was the end and close of livable life. After that, zip. Just await until the baby that came was old enough to warrant its own watched, guarded environment. Waiting for Violet, with less hesitation than before, Alice wondered why it was so. At 58, with no children of her own, and the one she had access to and responsibility for dead, she wondered about the hysteria, the violence, the damnation of pregnancy without marriageability. It had occupied her own parents' mind completely for as long as she could remember them. They spoke to her firmly but carefully about her body, sitting nasty, legs open, sitting womanish, legs crossed, breathing through her mouth, hands on hips, slumping at table, switching when you walked. The moment she got breasts, they were bound and resented, a resentment that increased to outright hatred of her pregnant possibilities and never stopped until she married Louis Manfred, when it suddenly was the opposite. Even before the wedding, her parents were murmuring about grandchildren they could see and hold, while at the same time, and in turn, resenting the tips showing and growing under the chemises of Alice's younger sisters. Resenting the blood spots, the new hips, the hair, that and the necessity for new clothes. Oh, Lord, girl! The frown when the hem could not be taken down further. The waistband refused another stitch. Growing up under that heated control, Alice swore she wouldn't, but she did pass it on. She passed it on to her baby sister's only child, and wondered now would she have done so had her husband lived or stayed, or if she had had children of her own. If he had been there by her side, helping her make decisions, maybe she would not be sitting there waiting for a woman called violent and thinking war thoughts. Although war was what it was, which is why she had chosen surrender and made Dorcas her own prisoner of war. Other women, however, had not surrendered. All over the country, they were armed. Alice worked once with a Swedish tailor who had a scar from his earlobe to the corner of his mouth. "Negress," he said, "she cut me to the teeth." To the teeth. He smiled his wonder and shook his head. To the teeth. The Iceman in Springfield had 4 evenly spaced holes in the side of his neck from 4 evenly spaced jabs by something thin, round, and sharp. Men ran through the streets of Springfield, East St. Louis, in this city, holding one red, wet hand in the other, a flap of skin on the face. Sometimes they got to a hospital safely alive, only because they left the razor where it lodged. Black women were armed. Black women were dangerous, and the less money they had, the deadlier the weapon they chose. Who were the unarmed ones? Those who found protection in church and the judging, angry God whose wrath in their behalf was too terrible to bear contemplation. He was not just on his way, coming to right the wrongs done to them. He was here, already. See what the world had done to them. It was now doing to itself. Did the world mess over them? Yes, but look where the mess originated. Were they berated and cursed? Oh yes, but look how the world cursed and berated itself. Were the women fondled in kitchens and the back of stores? Did police put their fists in women's faces so the husband's spirits would break along with the women's jaws? Did men, those who knew them as well as strangers sitting in motor cars, call them out of their names every single day of their lives? But in God's eyes and theirs, every hateful word and gesture was the beast's desire for its own filth. The beast did not do what was done to it, but what it wished done to itself. Raped because it wanted to be raped itself. Slaughtered children because it yearned to be slaughtered children. Built jails to dwell on and hold on to its own private decay. God's wrath, so beautiful, so simple. Their enemies got what they wanted, became what they visited on others. Who else were the unarmed ones? The ones who thought they did not need folded blades, packets of lye, shards of glass taped to their hands. Those who bought houses and hoarded money as protection and the means to purchase it. Those attached to armed men. Those who did not carry pistols because they became pistols. did not carry switchblades because they were switchblades, cutting through gatherings, shooting down statues, and pointing out the blood and abused flesh. Those who swelled their little unarmed strength into the reckoning one of leagues, clubs, societies, sisterhoods designed to hold or withhold, move or stay put, make a way, solicit, comfort, and ease. Bail out, dress the dead, pay the rent, find new rooms, start a school, storm an office, take up collections, route the block, and keep their eye on all the children. Any other kind of unarmed black woman in 1926 was silent or crazy or dead. Alice waited this time in the month of March for the woman with the knife. The woman people called violent now because she had tried to kill what lay in the coffin. She had left notes under Alice's door every day beginning in January, a week after the funeral. And Alice Manfred knew the kind of Negro that couple was, the kind she trained Dorcas away from, the embarrassing kind. More than unappealing, they were dangerous. The husband shot, the wife stabbed. Nothing. Nothing her niece did or tried could equal the violence done to her. Where there was violence, wasn't there also vice? Gambling, cursing, a terrible and nasty closeness, red dresses, yellow shoes, and of course, race music to urge them on. But Alice was not frightened of her now as she had been in January, and as she was in February, the first time she let her in. She thought the woman would end up in jail one day. They all did eventually. But easy pickings, natural prey? I don't think so. I don't think so. At the wake, Malvon gave her the details, tried to anyway. Alice leaned away from the woman and held her breath as though to keep the words at bay. I appreciate your concern, Alice told her. Help yourself. She gestured toward the tables crowded with food and well-wishers circling it. There's so much. I feel so bad, Malvon said, like it was my own. Thank you. You raise other people's children, and it hurts just the same as it would if it was your own. You know about Sweetness, my nephew? Excuse me. Did everything for him, everything a mother would. Please, help yourself. There's so much, too much. Those old reprobates, they live in my building, you know. Hello, Felice. Nice of you to come. She did not want to hear or know too much then, and she did not want to see that woman they began to call violent either. The note she slid under Alice's door offended her, then frightened her. But after a while, having heard how torn up the man was and reading the headlines in The Age, The News, The Messenger, by February she had steeled herself and let the woman in. What could you want from me? Oh, right now I just want to sit down on your chair, Violet said. I'm sorry, I just can't think what good can come of this. I'm having trouble with my head, said Violet, placing her fingers on the crown of her hat. See a doctor, why don't you? Violet walked past her, drawn like a magnet to a small side table. Is that her? Alice didn't have to look to know what she was staring at. Yes. The long pause that followed, where Violet examined the face that loomed out of the frame, made Alice nervous. Before she got up the courage to ask the woman to leave, she turned away from the photograph, saying, I'm not the one you need to be scared of. No? Who is? I don't know. That's what hurts my head. You didn't come here to say you sorry. I thought maybe you did. You come in here to deliver some of your own evil. I don't have no evil of my own. I think you'd better go. Let me rest here a minute. I can't find a place where I can just sit down. That's her? There? I just told you it was. She give you a lot of trouble? No, none. Well, some. I was a good girl her age. Never gave a speck of trouble. I did everything anybody told me to, till I got here. City make you tighten up. Odd acting, thought Alice, but not bloody-minded. And before she could think not to let it happen, the question was out. Why did he do such a thing? Why did she? Why did you? I don't know. The second time she came, Alice was still pondering over those wild women with their packets of lye, their honed razors, the keloids here, and there. She was pulling the curtain to cut off the light that smashed right into her visitor's eyes when she said, "Your husband, does he hurt you?" "Hurt me?" Violet looked puzzled. "I mean, he seemed so nice, so quiet. Did he beat on you?" "Joe? No, he never hurt nothing." "Except Dorcas." "And squirrels." "What?" "Rabbits, too. Deer, possum, pheasant. We ate good down home." "Why'd you leave?" "Landowner didn't want rabbit. He wants soft money." "They want money here, too. But there's a way to get it here. I did day work when I first came here. 3 houses a day got me good money. Joe cleaned fish at night. Took a while before he got hotel work. I got into hairdressing, and Joe, I don't want to hear about all that." Violet shut up and stared at the photograph. Alice gave it to her to get her out of the house. The next day she was back and looked so bad Alice wanted to slap her. Instead, she said, "Take that dress off and I'll stitch up your cuff." Violet wore the same dress each time, and Alice was irritated by the thread running loose from her sleeve, as well as the coat lining ripped in at least 3 places she could see. Violet sat in her slip with her coat on, while Alice mended the sleeve with the tiniest stitches. At no time did Violet take off her hat. "At first I thought you came here to harm me. Then I thought you wanted to offer condolences. Then I thought you wanted to thank me for not calling the law. But none of that is it, is it? I had to sit down somewhere. I thought I could do it here, that you would let me, and you did. I know I didn't give Joe much reason to stay out of the street, but I wanted to see what kind of girl he'd rather me be. Foolish. He'd rather you were 18, that's all. No, something more. You don't know anything about your own husband. I can't be expected to help you. You didn't know they were seeing each other no more than I did, and you saw her every day like I did Joe. I know where my mind was. Where was yours? Don't chastise me. I won't let you do that." Alice had finished the sheets and begun the first shirtwaist when Violet knocked on her door. Years and years and years ago, she had guided the tip of the iron into the seams of a man's white shirt, dampened just so the fabric smoothed and tightened with starch. Those shirts were scraps now, dust cloths, monthly cloths, rags tied around pipe joints to hinder freezing, pot holders and pieces to test hot irons and wrap their handles, even wicks for oil lamps, salt bags to scrub the teeth. Now her own shirtwaists got her elegant, attentive care. 2 pairs of pillow slips, still warm to the touch, were stacked on the table. So were the 2 bed sheets. Next week, perhaps, the curtains. By now she recognized the knock and never knew if she was eager or angry when she heard it, and she didn't care. When Violet came to visit, and Alice never knew when that might be, something opened up. The dark hat made her face even darker. Her eyes were round as silver dollars, but could slit of a sudden, too. The thing was how Alice felt and talked in her company, not like she did with other people. With Violet, she was impolite, sudden, frugal. No apology or courtesy seemed required or necessary between them, but something else was. Clarity, perhaps. The kind of clarity crazy people demand from the not crazy. Violet, her coat lining repaired too now, her cuffs secure, needed only to pay attention to her hose and hat to appear normal. Alice sighed a little sigh, amazed at herself as she opened the door to the only visitor she looked forward to. "You look froze." "Near about," said Violet. "March can put you in the sick bed." "Be a pleasure," Violet answered. "All my troubles be over if I could get my body sick instead of my head." "Then who would do the fancy woman's hair?" Violet laughed. "Nobody. Maybe nobody would do it, and nobody would know the difference. The difference is more than a hairdo. They're just women, you know, like us." "No," said Alice. No, they're not. Not like me. I don't mean the trade. I mean the women. Oh, please, said Alice. Let's get off that. I'm steeping you some tea. They were good to me when nobody else was. Me and Joe eat because of them. Don't tell me about it. Anytime I come close to borrowing or needing extra, I can work all day, any day on their heads. Don't tell me, I said. I don't want to hear about it and where the money comes from. You want tea or not? Yeah, okay. Why not? Why can't you hear about it? Oh, the men, the nasty life. Don't they fight all the time? When you do their hair, you're not afraid they might start fighting? Only when they sober, Violet smiled. Oh, well, they share men, fight them and fight over them too. No woman should live like that. No, no woman should have to. Killing people. Alice sucked her teeth. Makes me sick to my stomach. She poured the tea, then lifting cup and saucer, held it back while she looked at Violet. If you had found out about them before he killed her, would you have? I wonder. Alice handed her the tea. I don't understand women like you. Women with knives. She snatched up a long-sleeved blouse and smoothed it over the ironing board. I wasn't born with a knife. No, but you picked one up. You never did? Violet blew ripples into the tea. No, I never did. Even when my husband ran off, I never did that. And you didn't even have a worthy enemy. Somebody worth killing. You picked up a knife to insult a dead girl. But that's better, ain't it? The harm was already done. She wasn't the enemy. Oh, yes, she is. She's my enemy. Then, when I didn't know it, and now, too. Why? Because she was young and pretty and took your husband away from you? Violet sipped her tea and did not answer. After a long silence, and after their talk had turned to trifles, then on to the narrowness of life, Violet said to Alice Manfred, Wouldn't you? You wouldn't fight for your man? Seated in childhood, watered every day since, fear had sprouted through her veins all her life. Thinking war thoughts it had gathered, blossomed into another thing. Now, as she looked at this woman, Alice heard her question like the pop of a toy gun. Somewhere in Springfield, only the teeth were left. Maybe the skull, maybe not. If she dug down deep enough and tore off the top, she could be sure that the teeth would certainly be there. No lips to share with the woman she had shared them with. No fingers to lift her hips as he had lifted others. Just the teeth exposed now. Nothing like the smile that had made her say, choose. And he did. What she told Violet was true. She had never picked up a knife. What she neglected to say, what came flooding back to her now, was also true. Every day and every night for 7 months, she, Alice Manfred, was starving for blood. Not his. Oh no, for him she planned sugar in his motor, scissors to his tie, burned suits, slashed shoes, ripped socks, vicious, childish acts of violence to inconvenience him, remind him, but no blood. Her craving settled on the red liquid coursing through the other woman's veins. An ice pick stuck in and pulled up would get it. Would a clothesline rope circling her neck and yanked with all Alice's strength make her spit it up? Her favorite, however, the dream that plumped her pillow at night, was seeing herself mount a horse, then ride it and find the woman alone on a road and gallop till she ran her down under 4 iron hooves, then back again and again until there was nothing left but tormented road dirt signaling where the hussy had been. He had chosen, so would she. And maybe after galloping through 7 months of nights on a horse she neither owned nor knew how to ride, over the twitching, pulpy body of a woman who wore white shoes in winter, laughed loud as a child, and who had never seen a marriage license, maybe she would have done something wild. But after 7 months, she had to choose something else. The suit, the tie, the shirt he liked best. They suggested she not waste the shoes. No one would see them. But socks? Surely he has to have socks? Of course, said the mortician. Socks, of course. And what difference did it make that one of the mourners was her sworn and hated enemy, laying white roses on the coffin, taking away one the color of her dress? For 30 years he was turning into teeth in Springfield, and neither she nor the mourner in the inappropriate dress could do a thing about it. Alice slammed the pressing iron down. "You don't know what loss is," she said, and listened as closely to what she was saying as did the woman sitting by her ironing board in a hat in the morning.